3 weeks into the season, there are three statistics that can tell us exactly the type of team the New York Jets are. I'll tell you what they are today on Locked On Jets.
You are Locked On Jets, your daily New York Jets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome. This is the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It's Tuesday, September 24th, 2024, and I'm your host, John B. from GettingGreenNation.com. Thank you so much for making the show your first listener, first watch every day. Subscribe to the show for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts so you'll get new episodes as soon as they're posted. If you enjoy the show and are listening on a podcast for us, please give it a 5-star review. And if you're watching on YouTube and enjoy the show, give this episode a big thumbs up. It helps us out, helps other Jets fans find the podcast. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Place your first $5 bet and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. On today's show, we're going to talk about some statistics. I've been going through numbers. I found three that I think are really relevant to the type of team the New York Jets have been through the first 3 weeks of the 2024 season. So 3 weeks, three stats. Don't you like how that lines up? And of course, there's still a lot of time to change. We still have 14 games left in the season. The Jets are the first 3 weeks of the season, may not necessarily be the team they are for the bulk of the year, but I still think that these numbers give us an early indication of the type of team the Jets are on both sides of the ball. And the first stat I'm going to go to is from Next Gen Stats, and that is Aaron Rodgers averaging 2.51 seconds between receiving the snap and throwing the football. And that is the fifth quickest rate in the league behind Andy Dalton, Malik Willis, Jaden Daniels, and Tua Tagovailoa. So, I mean, I haven't followed any of these other teams in depth, but, Andy Dalton played yesterday for Carolina. He's playing on a broken infrastructure. A veteran in this situation like that is going to try and get the ball out quick. Tua Tagovailoa, obviously Miami's offense, if you watch them, they like to get the ball out quick as well. Jaden Daniels, Malik Willis, two young quarterbacks. Their schemes are kind of involving getting the ball out quickly. Rodgers, again, 2.51 seconds between receiving the snap and throwing the football, fifth quickest in the league. And even in week 3, and this was interesting because week 3, where you saw him extend some plays with his legs for the first time all year, it still was 2.59 seconds to throw, which was, again, a pretty quick rate. Not exactly slow getting the ball out. That was still the ninth quickest time from snap to pass in the league. And I think that tells us a lot about the type of quarterback Aaron Rodgers is. Now, we talked on yesterday's show about Rodgers showing some increased mobility against New England, and you certainly hope that that's going to be something you see more frequently, but that's a relative term. That's a difference between barely seeing him extend plays week 1 and week 2 and doing it a couple times week 3. If he does it at the rate he does week 3, the Jets are going to have a heck of a season because he's going to play very well. But no matter what, I think Rodgers' focus is getting the ball out quickly. And there are a couple of reasons for that. Is that, at the end of the day, listen, maybe what we saw on Thursday Night Football was the start of something new. Maybe the Achilles is finally feeling well, but at the end of the day, this is a 40-year-old quarterback. He's probably not going to move as well as he did back when he was 25. He's probably not going to move as well as he did when he was 33. He's older. Your mobility goes away when you get older. What doesn't go away is your smarts. Rodgers is as good as anybody at looking at the line of scrimmage, dissecting what the defense is doing, and figuring out a way to pick them apart. And he has the full range of options available to him. The Jets trust him inherently with the playbook. We talked about this yesterday, how Rodgers can just change a receiver's route, where Zach Wilson maybe could change. If Jack Wilson tried to change something, he'd have to change the full play. Maybe he'd go to a kill call and go from a pass to a run. Rodgers can just suddenly adjust something. And part of it's just because he sees the defense better than anybody else does. He'll be able to point out weaknesses better than any other quarterback in the NFL. Now, one of the things that strikes me is that Rodgers, again, even week 3 was still getting the ball out pretty quickly, is on a team where there's kind of a mismatch with the types of receivers the Jets have. Garrett Wilson gets quick separation, so he's a good receiver to have, especially as your number 1 guy, and a quick get the ball out quickly offense. I don't know that Mike Williams is a great match for that. And I've been singing Mike Williams' praise for ever since the Jets signed him, but I'm starting to wonder maybe Mike Williams is not the greatest fit for this offense. And the first couple of weeks of the season he was kind of on a pitch count, and I think a lot of us have been attributing Williams' relative lack of production to that, but I don't know. I don't think Williams is going to be a bad player. I do think his productivity is going to go up. I mean, I think 5 catches through the first 3 games, and he did have, and 4 of those 5 catches came week 3. So clearly he's improving. But I might recalibrate my expectations for Mike Williams this year. I'm not sure he's necessarily going to have as big of a year as I thought he would. Again, could do more than the one catch weeks 1 and week 2. And I know that one catch week 2 was a big one, but he may play less of a role in this offense than I think. And Allen Lazard, of course, is Allen Lazard. Hey, nice game Thursday Night Football, but he's still Lazard at the end of the day. I think that this quick strike offense, this get the ball out quick style, is really going to benefit the running backs. And if you look at what the Jets are doing, it kind of meshes with that. Breece Hall is second on the team in targets with 19. And I'll tell you, I'm changing my tune on some things. I spent the entire offseason telling you Breece Hall would have less targets this year because the Jets wouldn't be checking it down as much because they have better receivers around. Well, if you're looking to get the ball out quickly, one of the easiest things to do, especially in a playmaking running back, is just throw him the ball. And Breece Hall has 19 targets in 3 games, second on the team. But here's another number for you. Braylon Allen, 8 targets. That's 5th on the team. Tyler Conklin has 10. So your number 2 running back almost has as many targets as your starting tight end. And that speaks volumes. And there are 2 things you want in an offense that's focused on timing, that's focused on quick passes. You either want somebody who can separate quickly like a Garrett Wilson, or you want a good yak guy, yards after the catch. You want somebody who can make plays with the ball in his hands after the catch. And Jets number 2 and 3 receivers, Williams and Lazard, not really their forte. And now I know maybe after all these years in the NFL, Allen Lazard has become a dominant yak receiver based on what we saw Thursday night, but I kind of doubt it. But you know who is good after the catch? A running back, because that's what they do. Running backs usually aren't running these highly sophisticated route trees. They're not running a ton of option routes. They're not asking them to run routes with precision. A couple of backs can. Kamara can do it. McCaffrey can do it. Breece, look, I know Breece had that great catch against Tennessee, which was a pretty good route, but I think Breece is actually, a better route runner than a lot of people give him credit for. But I don't think Breece is like a route running technician. I think the reason Breece Hall was so productive last year as a receiver is that he's just a great player. That once he catches the ball, it's kind of like he's taking the handoff. And again, blocking is a little different. We talked about this a bit yesterday. Braylon Allen's also shown soft hands. And that was something that really stood out to me when I watched his footage from Wisconsin, is that, maybe he wasn't used all that much in the passing game, but you saw the ability. There were moments where he flashed the ability, where he caught passes that were off target, where he showed the ability to adjust to a ball in the air. If you're looking to get it out quickly, there's no easier way to do it than just dump it off to the running back, because especially these two backs are guys who are very adept at making big plays. So you just throw them the ball, and once they got the ball in their hands, there's something special. I'm going to make a statement that might sound a little bold. I wrote about it last week on gangreennation.com, that I would not be surprised if both of these running backs were in the top 4 in a lot of the major Jet statistical categories when we're talking about receiving, because of what Rodgers likes to do. And anyway, through his career, Rodgers has utilized the running backs a lot because Rodgers does not put the ball in danger. Rodgers picks his spots. Rodgers throws tight window passes, but he's smart. There's nobody better at picking his spots. Tight window does not necessarily mean high danger. Rodgers throws tight window passes that have very little chance of being picked off because he's using the defender's leverage against him, or he's throwing where he knows a defender won't be looking, or a defender hasn't turned his head and Rodgers knows where to put it. He doesn't try those passes. If those passes are all that's there, he'll just check it down. But beyond that, I think that the Jets have 2 skilled running backs who can help in the receiving game. And that's something that'll benefit them going forward. And I think this quick strike offense is very suited to the player Aaron Rodgers is right now. If he just had sprinkled in a few plays where he extends it, now we have an offense that's cooking. Now, head here on the Locked On Jets podcast, we'll turn our attention to the defensive side of the ball. There's been a standout player for the Jets. If you look at the stat sheet, he's been one of the most dominant players at his position in the league. Another number suggests he's not quite as dominant, but he's still developing at a good rate. We'll talk about Will McDonald continuing here on this Tuesday edition of Locked On Jets. Today's episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by LinkedIn. When you're hiring for your small business, you want to find quality professionals that are right for the role. And that's why you got to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs has the tools to help find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. Of course, the Jets all got all these great players through their front office and scouting departments. Let LinkedIn be your front office and scouting department for your small business. LinkedIn is not just a jobs board. LinkedIn helps you hire professionals you can't find anywhere else, even those who are not actively searching for a new job, but might be open to the perfect role. In a given month, over 70% of LinkedIn users don't use other leading job sites. So if you're not looking on LinkedIn, you're looking in the wrong place. And on LinkedIn, 86% of the small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. Hire professionals like a professional on LinkedIn. And LinkedIn knows that small businesses are wearing so many hats and may not have the time or resources to hire. So LinkedIn is constantly finding new ways to make the process easier. They even just launched a feature that helps you write job descriptions, making the process even easier and quicker. 2.5 million small businesses use LinkedIn for hiring. That's probably why. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Thank you so much for making Locked On Jets your first listener, first watch every day, and a big shout out to you everydayers. This is a daily podcast covering the New York Jets. We have new episodes each day through the week, Monday through Friday. Let's continue now. I'm giving you 3 stats today that I think tell the story of the Jets season so far. In our first segment, we talked about the offense. Let's move to the defensive side of the ball. A guy who was a controversial draft pick in 2023, to say the least. A guy who received a lot of criticism his rookie year because it really was kind of a lost year where he was just a developmental player, although that's what we should have expected. A guy who's getting a lot of praise now, Will McDonald, who has 5 sacks through 3 games. And if you go back 2 weeks ago today, we were recapping the game after the San Francisco 49ers. And there were a lot of Jets fans who were very critical of Will McDonald, and not unfairly so. I mean, I think sometimes like we get like all high and mighty about like people criticizing a player. But sometimes the player deserved it. Just because Will McDonald played well week 2, week 3, that doesn't mean he's immune from criticism for week 1. He was bad in week 1, but he's turned it around in a big way the last 2 weeks. 5 sacks in the last 2 games, if you haven't noticed. Does this mean Will McDonald is one of the premier pass rushers in the NFL? Well, no. And, especially early in the season, you get some numbers that can be a little fluky, that can maybe overinflating a player's performance, or maybe not give a player his due. Look, I think if you watch these sacks, that some of these are probably not going to were not done in ways that are sustainable. I think, there were a couple where, there was one where he was unblocked, one where he was a spy on Will Levis, one where, the famous Levis rolling the ball on the ground play. I still can't get over that. It's been 8-9 days, and I still can't get over the Levis rolling the ball on the ground play. But McDonald was credited with a sack and a forced fumble because he was the guy closest to Levis on the play. That said, though, I think Will McDonald is playing well. I think he's looking like a promising young pass rusher. I think you saw it in the preseason. That spin move, he's got it down. I don't know that he's necessarily got the outside rush. He's got to figure out. I talked a lot in the preseason about how if he can combine the spin move and the speed rush, then we'll have something. I haven't seen it. Doesn't necessarily have to be a speed rush. He's got to have some move that goes to the outside. The spin move works well on the inside, but if you can match that with a move to the outside, then you've really got something. Because offensive linemen see the spin move enough, they're going to protect to the inside. They're maybe overcompensate. So then when they overcompensate to the inside, you want to be able to blow past them on the outside. I haven't seen that yet for McDonald, but the spin move looks good, and he's getting to the quarterback at a decent rate. And that brings me to the stat. You may be wondering, John, well, what's the stat you're going to bring up? McDonald has 10 pressures so far this season. That's in the top 20 in the league. So again, not number 1, but still promising. I think most of us would have signed up for 10. And again, I know a couple of these are, the unblocked variety, but 10 pressures through 3 games, that's a pretty good rate. I think anybody would have signed up for that for Will McDonald before the start of the season. So why did the pressures matter? Well, the way I look at it is everybody who studied this in recent years has concluded that there's a direct correlation long-term between your pressure rate and your sack rate. If you have a lot of pressures, but you aren't getting a lot of sacks, typically your sack number is going to go up, and vice versa. If you're getting a lot of sacks, but not a lot of pressures, typically your number is going to go down. Of course, there are exceptions. Carl Lawson, you may remember, the Jets signed him from Cincinnati, always a high pressure, low sack guy. And the sacks never really went up for him with the Jets. I was very optimistic about that signing. It never really worked out, though, in part due to injury, but Lawson just never really got there for the Jets. But for the most part, lots of pressures, you're eventually going to get lots of sacks. Lots of sacks, low pressures, your sacks are going to go down. The Vic Beasley rule. You may remember Vic Beasley was this pass rusher the Atlanta Falcons had. Jets actually passed on him in the top 10 in the 2015 draft. Vic Beasley led the league in sacks the second year, but had a low pressure rate and never really matched that rate. It never really matched the sack rate again. Now, it's easy to give you these numbers and say there's a correlation, but why is there a correlation? I think the answer is pretty simple. If you watch the NFL, I think you'll probably agree with this assessment. For the most part, not entirely. Of course, there are the plays where the offense blows an assignment and you go through the line on touch. But for the most part, if you generate a pressure as a pass rusher, you've done something right. You've typically beaten your man. And for the most part, a sack means the offense has done something really wrong, particularly the quarterback. Now, again, pressure is different. If you allow a pressure, it's usually your offensive lineman who's done it because you haven't sustained the block. But quarterbacks do have tools at their disposal. Going back to the Rodgers quick time to throw thing. Rodgers gets the ball out quickly. If Rodgers is in duress, he'll find his check down, he'll find his hot route, or he'll throw it away. Less experienced quarterbacks, guys who aren't as good, they don't do that. They take sacks. And I mean, look, think about if you've been a Jets fan for the last 5 years, if you've been a Jets fan for the last 10 years, if you've been a Jets fan for the last 15 years, how many times have you seen a young quarterback take a sack he shouldn't have taken? Yeah, maybe the offensive line was to blame for the pressure, but the quarterback frequently, bad quarterbacks take sacks they shouldn't take. So this is why I look at the pressure rate. This is why I look at how many pressures are you getting, because over the long run, the level of quarterback you play evens out. You're not going to play Will Levis every week taking horrible sacks. You'll get your share of good quarterbacks as well, but you'll usually get a balanced diet of quarterbacks. And if you have a lot of pressures through the course of the season, you're going to get a lot of sacks because you'll beat up on your share of bad quarterbacks. You'll have your share of quarterbacks who are middle of the pack who will sometimes take bad sacks and sometimes not. Then you have your good quarterbacks, and your good quarterbacks will take those bad sacks less frequently. That's why I look at it's not that pressure is as important as a sack. A sack obviously does a lot more for you as a defense than a pressure does. A pressure can still result in a good play. If the quarterback beats the pressure, a quarterback can step up, a quarterback can move off his spot and still hit a big pass. You will never allow a big play if you get a sack. And a sack, is a loss of yardage. A sack always puts the defense behind the sticks. Sack always gives you a better result than a pressure. The reason, though, pressures are more important. It's not. And I think that there's this misconception. When you hear me or somebody else talk about pressure rate being more important than sack rate, that's the reason. Because at the end of the day, there is a correlation, and these things even out over the long run. And yes, Will McDonald is getting a lot of sacks where the way he's getting them are not sustainable. We can't expect an offensive line to not block him the way we saw Thursday night against New England. But he is also generating a lot of pressures. And that means that the sacks he is getting, that key sack on the final drive against Tennessee, or the other sack on Thursday Night Football against New England, shows you that it's sustainable. Is Will McDonald going to be a 20-sack guy? I really doubt it based on these first couple of weeks. You can talk about the pace he's on all you want. I don't think Will McDonald's on pace to be the best pass rusher in the NFL. But Will McDonald doesn't need to be the best pass rusher in the NFL to justify his top 15 selection. And I could go into another dialogue about how we should always view picks as long-term propositions. I talked about that a lot when McDonald was drafted, how you can't judge a pick immediately. If a pick doesn't fit an immediate need, it doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad pick. Those are other elements to this. But the one element I'll give you is that Will McDonald's looking promising. Maybe not as promising as 5 sacks in 3 games would suggest, but still, the underlying fundamentals looking pretty good. Now, ahead here on the Locked On Jets podcast, we'll close out our show. I'll give you a team stat that kind of tells the story of the defensive trajectory of the New York Jets through the first 3 weeks. And if this trajectory stays the same, we're looking at a pretty good year on the defensive side of the ball. We'll discuss what that is ahead here on this Tuesday edition of Locked On Jets. Today's episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by FanDuel. NFL fans, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. When you've got a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. Jets host the Denver Broncos this Sunday, MetLife Stadium. First Sunday Jets home game of the year. They had their home opener Thursday night, and the Jets are favored. Jets are favored to be the Broncos team that may have looked impressive Sunday, but hasn't been that great all that great this season. Again, a $5 bet on FanDuel will get you $200 in bonus bets. Just visit FanDuel.com, America's #1 sportsbook. That's FanDuel.com. This is the Locked On Jets podcast on this Tuesday. We're talking about 3 stats that tell the story of the first 3 weeks of the season for the New York Jets. We've talked about Aaron Rodgers' quick release. We've talked about Will McDonald's pressures. I'll give you a really basic one. And this is not, I don't think anybody, if you watch the first 3 games, are going to be surprised by these numbers. But I think it tells the story of why the defense has continually improved. Week 1, 10 missed tackles. Yeah, I know you may have to sit down after hearing that one if you watch Week 1. Jets did not tackle one in San Francisco. This is the analysis you tune into Locked On Jets for, the cutting edge analysis. The Jets tackled poorly Week 1 in San Francisco. That's what I'm telling you right now. 7 missed tackles week 2 against Tennessee, 4 missed tackles week 3 against New England. Now, if you were to rank Jets defensive performances this year, I think it's probably pretty clear it would be inverse of the order the games were played in. Week 3 against New England, their best defensive effort of the year. Week 2 against Tennessee, kind of so-so. Really bad start, got better over the course of the game. Week 1 against San Francisco, utter disaster. Feels like a long time ago because the Jets are 2-1 now. They went on to win two games in the next 10 days or so. But week 1 in San Francisco, that was an ugly performance. And sometimes it's that basic. You got to tackle well, and I think especially at the linebacker position. Quincy Williams had a really rough week 1. I thought it was so rough that I'm not going to say I was all that worried about it, but there has been the lingering thought in the back of my mind. Was 2023 Quincy Williams' career year, and is he going to regress to the guy he used to be? I didn't think so. I think that there were things I saw in the film last year that were very repeatable. It just felt like it clicked for Quincy. But that first week was so rough that the thought at least popped into my mind. Unfortunately, week 2, Quincy was dominant again, played some great football, and the Jets were able to beat Tennessee. Then week 3, it was a dominant performance. And heading into that game, I was a little nervous because New England had run the ball very effectively to that point in the season. So I sat there wondering, is this Jets team going to be able to stop the run? Because the Patriots, they don't really try and surprise you on the offensive side of the ball at this point. They're really just focused on trying to run the ball. They're really focused on, controlling the clock, trying to control the trenches. It's an undermanned team. It's a team that's not super talented. They have to do what they can to try and win games. So I watched that game with some degree of trepidation. But hey, the Jets showed up. They did a better job in the trenches, but more than anything, they tackled effectively. And, week 1, there were a couple of mitigating factors. Number 1, they're playing a really good San Francisco team with a lot of playmakers on offense. A team like San Francisco, I would bet, forces a lot of missed tackles. Number 2, it's week 1. We see it across the league, and this is going to a wider dialogue about preseason and all that. And, some people will, I got criticized. I got not criticized, but so I did get a mailbag question last week that suggested I was too hard on the Jets for resting their starters in the preseason. So I don't want to go overboard with that. I think it's true across the league. Teams aren't really playing their starters during the exhibition season, and that leads to some very sloppy results week 1. And maybe I'm making excuses for the Jets, but I do think there were some mitigating circumstances there. Look, tackling is it's pretty obvious. Tackling is a huge part of football. When the Jets tackle better, they play better defense. You're not allowing teams to create extra yardage. Every missed tackle provides an opportunity for another team to have a more successful offensive play than they would have had otherwise. So just the type of thing you want to avoid. Is this a signal the Jets defense is rounding into form? Well, we certainly hope so. I do think expectations need to be calibrated a bit. With this team down its top 2 defensive ends, it's not going to be as easy. I don't know if Reddick shows up and looks like Reddick, then we might be having a different discussion. But I don't know that it's realistic for the Jets to be a top 5 defense anymore. I'd like to see it happen. I'd like to be wrong about that, but it's not going to be easy. But one thing that they can control, they can't control whether Reddick comes back. They can't control the injury to Jermaine Johnson. Will McDonald obviously helps to a degree, but Will McDonald can't do it all on his own. But what they can control is the tackling. Don't make mistakes. Part of being a great team is in the mundane. I always mention this with Rodgers, that I think that of course, everybody focuses on the spectacular plays, the great throws, like the touchdown to Garrett Wilson on Thursday night, pinpoint accuracy. But I think one of the things that really sets Rodgers apart is just how he executes on a play-to-play basis. Because think about all the Jets young quarterbacks we've had. Almost all of them had the ability to make a great play here or there. Almost all of them could at their best play at a pretty high level. The issue, though, is that they couldn't do it on a consistent basis. Rodgers does it. Rodgers hits the mundane. Those checkdowns I was talking about earlier to Braylon Allen and Breece Hall. Keep the offense on schedule. Same's true on the defensive side of the ball. Look, you want having stars like Sauce Gardner is important. Reddick returning would help. But the things that are easiest to control are the ones right in front of you. Tackle effectively. Focus on your fundamentals, and that's the type of thing that can make that can help a defense take off. Anyway, that's all for today's episode. This has been the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day is our motto. As always, if you enjoy the show, hit the subscribe button where you're watching or listening so that you'll never miss an episode. If you enjoy the show and are listening on the podcast source, please give it a 5-star review. And if you're watching on YouTube and enjoy the show, give this episode a big thumbs up. Helps us out, helps other Jets fans find the podcast. Enjoy your Tuesday, everybody. Send in your mailbag questions. Tomorrow we'll do our weekly mailbag show.